Wednesday night rugby on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, official sponsors of the Irish rugby team. Team of us. Everyone in.
Now, very happy to say Keith Wood with us. Hi, Keith.
Hey, Joe. How are you doing?
Very well. So, a few things going on. Ireland squad named today. This is for the Japan game. Japan game being on the 3rd of July, 1 o'clock Saturday. And the USA game also at the Aviva Stadium. That's a week later on July 10th, which will be 7:15. There will be fans at the Aviva Stadium. This will be as part of one of these pilot events, which is good. So, big enough squad named by Andy Farrell. The headline news as such, Johnny Sexton is fit. Actually, that was the interesting thing from the press conference. Johnny Sexton is fit again, but he's been excused. He's given some rest. Keith Earls the same and Cian Healy the same. So Sexton, Earls, Cian Healy rested. 11 uncapped players come in, and I suppose what caught the eye was that the out-halves are Joey Carberry, Billy Burns and Harry Byrne. So no place for Ross Byrne, for instance. And that caught the eye, I suppose. James Ryan, captain of the squad. Hard to know what you read into all of this, I suppose. These are fairly low-key matches, not even a tour this time around.
Yeah, I think they're low-key, but I also think it's an opportunity to have a look at as many players as possible. There's 37 guys in that squad for 2 matches, which is huge. I think it'll give an opportunity for Farrell to see how lots of new players into the squad can perform at training, how they turn up, what their attitude is like, what their ceiling might be. You get a better idea when you see them in the flesh and how they react to the players around them. So that's a good part of it. I'm delighted to see the players that have been rested, because I don't think we get any benefit from them playing in these matches. And I don't know. I still think the game has changed significantly enough that you need to manage what you have, and you need to manage the resources at your beck and call. Why would you play Johnny Sexton or Keith Earls against Japan or USA? And that sounds incredibly disrespectful, but I'm saying, if no matter what matches we're on at this time of the year, why would you play them? So you're going to have them for big matches, or you're not going to have them at all. And these are guys that have a lot of miles on the clock, and you like a little bit more out of them where you can. So I think if it's safe to say that Johnny Sexton his time is going to be limited in a green jersey, in any jersey, I think, going forward. So we want him for big games where possible, and we want other guys to take over from him, because he will not play forever. And in that regard, I think it's interesting picking Harry Byrne. Everybody that has played with him and have seen him up close have said that he has a very high ceiling. Well, I think these are great matches to be able to see whether he can break through those.
Yeah. He said of the out-half situation, Andy Farrell, that is, as far as Ross Byrne's concerned, I suppose he's in the same boat as Jack Carty or Luke McGrath or Kieran Marmion. Those guys have been in, they've done great jobs for us in the past, and they'll take a rest, albeit on standby, to come back in. I mean, that's a polite way of putting it, I suppose. If I was Ross Byrne, unfortunately, I'd be sitting there with my arms crossed thinking, I know what this means, and it's not good.
You'd be trying not to dig your brother, is what you'd be doing if you were Ross Byrne. But yeah, I think it's a recognition that he can. I think he took a couple of steps forward and a couple of steps back this year. I think there was a couple of matches where he played on the line. He looked an awful lot more imposing, and then in a couple of the pressurised games, he went back into a shell a little. He can't really play for Ireland if he's playing in his shell. So that's the change he's going to have to make, that he becomes infinitely more assertive. He's going to get smashed in doing so, but that's the nature of playing 10. And that's what he's going to have to go and do. He's the best kicker that we have. He's one of the best kickers in the world off the tee. He is so consistent. It's so easy, effortless for him. He needs to bring that level of confidence and consistency into controlling a game more. And that's harder when the pressure is harder. So he has to learn that very, very quickly. And that's a tough thing for him. And his brother gets a chance to do it. And he doesn't get a chance because he's sitting in the wings. So it's tough. It's not easy. And, to play out half, you're almost exposed constantly, and you get all the plaudits. You know, it's all the joy is there, the winning of matches is there, but also the failures are there too. It's a very, very hard place to play.
Yeah, for sure. It's such an area of focus. Like, there's 11 uncapped players in this squad. We went straight to Harry Byrne. We talked about Harry Byrne. Everybody will be looking out to see what Harry Byrne does. But a last one on him, we're talking about his ceiling being higher and maybe him being the player who, well, I guess along now with Joey Carberry, it's great to see him back and fit again, so he's in the mix. But maybe the real successor to Sexton, Harry Byrne or Joey Carberry. So from Harry Byrne's perspective, this period in with the squad, this is a chance for him to really make an impression. I would presume you said off the field stuff is important as well, how he carries himself, how he goes in training, and really to try and cement a spot going forward next squad, even if it's a little bit ahead of schedule with regard to how much he's played for Leinster.
It's funny, when you get young guys coming into a squad, you want them to be confident but not too cocky. You know, you want them to be engaging but not everything being a laugh and a joke. You want them to understand the pressure and to try and wear it lightly. No, you kind of want that for all players, mind you. That's a very steep learning curve for young guys, especially when you're coming into the sort of quarterback role at 10. So, look, for me, I think what you're looking for a young 10 is that he's vocal, is that he knows his game and is confident in his game, that he demands things of the players around him. And look, I'd go back to the earliest time of playing with Rog when he was a young fella, and you're telling him as a senior guy, you're saying, if you tell me to get out of the way, I'm going to get out of the way. And if you tell me where to go, I'm going to go there, because you're the eyes on the game. You're the guy who pulls the strings on the game. So you have to get to that place fairly quickly. And because the difference between now and when Rod started is you're given time then. And you're not given time anymore. It's become very blame oriented, much more so, I think, than it was 25 years ago or when Rod was starting, that it was more accepting of mistakes then. We'd all have been upset, but you'd say he's a young fella, look, he'll get good over time.
Yeah.
And you can see the quality he has. Now it's become, well, we're used to success and everybody has to be successful immediately. It's much tougher now.
Of the other uncapped players, I wonder who you're looking forward to seeing, or maybe who do you think here could establish themselves as a player going forward? We have Balakoon. I think everybody's a bit excited about his pace. Tom O'Toole, Nick Tominey of Ulster, Caelan Blade, Tom Daly, Paul Boyle of Connacht, Peter Dooley and Ross Maloney of Leinster, and then Gavin Coombs, who scored 4 tries at the weekend, and Finian Wycherley of Munster. They're the uncapped cohort going forward. Which of those might we be talking about in maybe 4, 5, 6 years as having a few caps under their belt?
I think Robert Balakoon, definitely. I think he has shown he's got a bit of size, a bit of pace, he's a bit of confidence. There's a spark about him, so I like him a lot. I want to see him play. I can't wait to see him play, actually, in an Irish jersey. I think Coombs is the standout player for Munster this season for a young guy. The amount of tries he scored, the power he has under pressure. I think he'll find it tough next year because he will be targeted next year, because he will be one of the main guys, and CJ carried a huge amount for Munster for so many years. He won't be carrying it. I would hope that we don't have Coombs doing the short, heavy carries. I want him doing the ones where he can power over people and do them at pace, because he is class. And I think Blade is quite interesting too. I mean, there's a lot of fighting around 9. I think there's people who have been almost ordained as successors, but I think that's more open. And I think there should be a good old battle there too. Okay,
interesting. By the way, just to mark everyone's card, don't be surprised if you see Andy Farrell in South Africa in July. So he said of the Lions situation, and again, the second match is July 10th, and obviously the first Lions test is the 24th of July, so there's a 2-week gap there. He said, I've spoken to Warren a couple of times and I'm more than happy, obviously, to help out. Where it stands at the moment is that Warren has left a spot open and he wants to see how the workload goes in the first week or so of the camps. If he needs any help around any of that, I'm happy to help out. So that sounds like there's a distinct chance Andy Farrell will head out, doesn't it?
I do, and I think that's great for all concerned. I think as a coach, you get better in those high pressured circumstances. You learn an awful lot about yourself and about other players. I think it's brilliant. I'd have been very upset if he went and wasn't here for the Irish team. Because he's only just in his first year, and I think that's a big deal, really. For the most part, like I'd say, a year and a bit, but it really is only 1 year because of COVID and all the delays have all been kind of squashed in. But and I think we need to be building an awful lot. So if he'd been out on the Lions tour and hadn't been there for the Japan and USA game, I'd be upset. Yeah. But I think we get every part right if he goes after the fact.
Speaking of Harry Byrne and the others getting in and having a chance to impress management, Ronan Kelleher, the news came through over the weekend. He is now training with the Lions over in Jersey at the moment as cover. So Jamie George and Luke Cowan-Dickie are involved with Saracens and Exeter respectively. So only Ken Owens there at the moment for training. So they put the call in to Ronan Kelleher and he's gone or going over certainly. I mean, it shows a few things. One, he's next man in, so that'll be a real fillip for him. An injury very easily happens and I'm next man in. And I would think he will, I presume, view this as a real opportunity to make some kind of marker here. Like, your advice to him would not be to go over there and just go through the motions and don't upset anyone kind of thing. You want to get stuck in and show him what you're about.
Oh, I'd upset everyone. He needs to go, get on the plane, get over there, which he is, and say, I'm a Lion until told otherwise. And I mean, how great it is that he gets to see Ken Owens up close. I think he's played against him, but he gets to see him, how he trains, how he acts, like the Lions is such an unbelievable experience for young guys. They just learn an awful lot from the players around them. But for him, I would say, yeah, I'm good enough to be here. I have to prove to Warren he should have picked me in the first place. And if there's a hint of an injury, not only will I go, but I can offer something very serious. So, Look, I think he is a guy. Look, we've noticed him for quite a while. He's had a couple of issues with his lineouts, haven't we all? I think when you play in that position, he'll get over those very quickly. I would imagine he'll learn an awful lot in the time that he's there now, over throwing under pressure. It's a different. It's all for training. It's the biggest learning experience you can have. So, if I was him, I'd be thinking I'm a Lion. And the only downside is that he's sent home at the end of it. It's a little bit vulnerable with his tail between his legs, just a little. But I would be opening up his heart to being a Lion and see how that would actually function for him. Yeah,
and sent home because that's the plan anyway. So, I mean, tail between his legs, even not massively. Yeah. No. And so the other point to make is, and you'd kind of whisper it in his ear, it's not like this is some UEFA competition or World Rugby competition. There's no limit on the squad. Like, if you do really well, Gatlin might just say, well, look, you're in the bubble, you're COVID free, you know all our calls, sure, come anyway. And sure, we have a 38-man squad or whatever it is. That's the other possibility, even if there's not an injury. What's the kind of gap with him and Owens, George and Cowan-Dickie? Where is he in that reckoning, do you think? How far off, if at all?
I think he is off because of experience and the amount of big games he's played. That's where he's off. Okay. And it's how does he react under pressure. So there's an element of risk in bringing him. So on older tours, I actually believe he would have been brought because you can grow in a longer period of time. You can get used to the pressure. Actually being in that bubble of quality just brings you to a higher level anyway. And I think he would have had a much better chance. On this one, I think it's much harder. So there's a risk element for Warren Gatland in picking him because he mightn't be able to take the pressure and it might be too much for him. Now, it could be that for everybody, but for younger guys who haven't played a huge amount, that's where the element of risk. So to not take the risk is understandable. But I think if it had been a full and normal tour, I think he would have been in with a very good shout of going there. I think he's a fantastic player. I think he offers a huge amount. I think he's maybe 2 or 3 years away from his best rugby. And that's an interesting place to get to. Can he accelerate that and keep it there for a longer period of time? So I don't think he's far away at all. And I think if you have an injury and you bring him out there, the risk is already gone because somebody else has got injured, and these are the decisions you have to make. But he offers something different. He's a very, very good ball carrier, very powerful. He just needs to tidy up some of the technical parts of the game.
Okay, well, hopefully he's a bolter in the real true sense of the word and goes out there under the radar and maybe has a tour, who knows. So you wish him well. He's hooked up with the Lions, still not officially part of the party, as we've said, but he's there as cover in the short term. On the weekend's action, I mean, there's not a huge amount to say, I suppose, about this competition that hasn't been said already. Leinster had fans at the RDS, which was a positive against Dragons, and Munster were in Parma against Zebre. Gavin Coombs, we mentioned, scored 4 tries. I haven't really talked to you the last couple of weeks. Leinster we've talked about at length. Munster's season then, so the endpoints are the very disappointing Pro 14 final against Leinster at the RDS, and then I know you were at the game for us in the Heineken Champions Cup where Toulouse knocked them out. Toulouse eventual winners, you can kind of say, well look, beaten by the eventual winners, you can kind of rationalise that as being okay in your own mind over the summer. How do you assess then the Munster season? Has this just been another season of lots of 2 steps forward, 1 step back? That's the consensus I seem to get from most of our pundits.
Yeah, look, I think Munster have improved in different places. I think other teams have improved as well, and I think it's maybe the wrong route is to try and match size with size. And I look back on that Toulouse game, and Munster were somehow in the game for a lot of it. They played with incredible heart for 70, 75 minutes. You'd live that dream and think that dream was possible, and you wonder if there was a crowd in there, whether it might have nudged them over the line to do it. And yet at the end, it seemed as if they were comprehensively beaten. And yet I thought Munster had a lot of opportunities, and their decision-making at time as to whether to pass or not to pass, or the quality of that passing, I think at times, and some of the decision-making let them down. So I think if Munster are going to think that they'll compete with the French teams by having huge forwards and be heavy hitting for everything, I don't think that that's the route for Munster or Leinster or Ulster, Connacht. I don't know that that's in our makeup, and I don't know if it can equally be in our financial makeup that we have to buy that in. I think that makes it very difficult. I think they suffered from a few injuries, and when you've big name signings, you want them to play, and we got 7 minutes out of Snyman this year, so that's a bit unfortunate. But I actually think they've played pretty well. But on the big days, I feel as if their performances haven't been at the standard that we would like and wish. So the Leinster game for me, in the final, I just didn't feel that Munster raised a gallop.
Well, that one was very dispiriting. They're probably lucky that wasn't their season sign-off, or there'd be a real sense of woe is us about the summer. And one last one on Munster then, those failings on the big days and maybe relying on big forward power at times, I would have said maybe you could have thrown that at Munster, that accusation, over the last couple of years, really. That's kind of where they've been for a while now, no?
I think Munster are a better team now. I think there's a better balance to it. I think the reliance on and the huge excitement on Joey Carberry coming back, but the reliance on a guy who hadn't played for nearly 2 years, that he would be the magic key to do it. I think it becomes a big season for him next season. But he needs to have an amount of time without being injured, an amount of time with a level of confidence, and maybe a game plan that isn't as kick-oriented as Munster's has been. I'm frustrated with the pick and go, and I'm frustrated with kicking away the ball. And I think Munster need to hold on to the ball for longer periods of time.
I take your point on Kirby. Big season for him for sure, and RG Sneeman back, and there's a few positives there. I'd put it to you, it feels like a big season for the coaching ticket. This is the first time where I've been reading pieces towards the end of this season, really asking serious questions of Van Graan. So he'll be feeling that bit of heat, I think, next year, fair or otherwise.
Fair, I would say. I think it's appropriate that you'd have the pressure on the coaches, because we would say that some of the play, it was late in changing. It started changing when there was almost like an air of freedom around making that change, and It required maybe a couple of guys being injured. It required a truncated season. It required playing fully loaded international teams against other teams that you might attack a little bit more. So at different times in the season, Munster played some fantastic rugby.
Yeah.
But it isn't that. It's playing under that level of pressure and trying to have both of those styles of play. I think those elements are interesting. But I think there's huge pressure because the expectation is that Munster can play at the top table. I have to say, getting to a final of your competition is the top table. I have to say, playing against and losing against the overall winners is pretty much at the top table. But that isn't good enough, and you know it isn't, because everybody wants their team to win. So I do think the standard of performance has to up. I do think the variation has to up, and so that, of course, that puts pressure on the coaches. But that's their job. That's what they have to try and deliver on.
It sure is. So a couple of weeks back, I think you caught some of the piece, but for anybody who didn't, we had Tom English on the show. Tom English is with BBC Scotland, but he's written a new book called This Is Your Everest, The Lions, the Springboks and the Epic Tour of 1997. I must say, and I said it to Tom, I had thought that this tour had been well excavated. I didn't need to know a whole lot more about the tour. But actually, it was a brilliant chat with him, and the book has loads of stuff in it that I just did not realise, not least about the South African perspective. So something I wanted to ask you about is that the years 95 to 97, when we think of South African rugby over here, I mean, in our heads, not a whole lot went on. They won the World Cup, then the Lions Tour was 2 years later. It turns out, and I'm sure you were aware of this at the time, but it turns out all hell was breaking loose in a number of ways. Some of it, just very unfortunate. They lost their coach, Kitch Christie. Ultimately, he passed away with leukemia in 98, so he had to leave the setup, and they basically hadn't lost a game under Christie. So that was a massive, massive issue. Politically, things weren't good. Fans started waving the apartheid flag again, and members of cabinet were saying they didn't support the team anymore. And Andrew Marcraft, one of their coaches, had to resign in disgrace for things he was saying, racial slurs, very, very messy. Johan Ackerman test positive for steroids in May of 97. And there are pay disputes as well, as in the younger players are getting far less money than the World Cup winners, and that's not a great dynamic in a team. All of this stuff, and more, by the way, is bubbling along. And then the chief issue, if you listen to the players, and that's where I'm going to with this, is that their 37-year-old coach, Carl du Plessis, who by all accounts was an outstanding player in the 80s, he was ill-equipped for that job, and they were unanimous that he was really not up to scratch. They all say, like, a lovely man, but really not at the races and just nowhere near the standard required at 37 years of age to coach them. And so the point I wanted to put to you is that everybody from, there's James Dalton, Teichmann says it as well. There's quite a few players who all say, basically, we gifted that tour to that Lions squad. A few of them say they didn't really rate the Lions squad. Basically, if we hadn't been in complete disarray, at our absolute worst, we would have won that series, and we should have won that series. And that's very much how we feel about it. That was the overwhelming response from the players. So a few questions. Did you know that's how they felt? Were they open about that, do you remember, at the time, or has that seeped out more recently?
Well, they weren't particularly... there wasn't a huge amount of interaction with them during the tour, apart from, I'm going to say, apart from beating them. There was definitely conversations afterwards, and I had it with a few of the players afterwards. We would have looked at that team. We knew there was disarray within them.
Right.
But I can tell you there's an element of after the fact in terms of that, because they were so confident they were going to beat us. I mean, if you're looking at back then, I think I haven't seen the book yet, but I had spoken to Tom English on it, and he got all excited about some of the South African sides of it, and he gets very excited about it anyway. And it's funny for a guy to be as in love with the topic that he was writing about, which he really is. And but we didn't care about anything like that. It was quite interesting. Our job was to go out and try and win a test series. And everything about that was that they were going to wipe the floor with us. So I don't know that that was bravado on their side, but that was the expectation that they had. But you couldn't step away from the fact that they couldn't kick snow off a rope. Their goal kicking stats on that was just appalling, and those 3 tests were just unbelievable. Well, the 2 tests that we won they were rubbish. They kept picking players out of position.
Yeah,
and like we were laughing at not laughing at it, because there's no fun in scrummaging, I tell you, against beasts of men like they are. But they thought they were going to kill us in the first test. And their expectation afterwards was, when they didn't kill us in the pack in the first test, they would absolutely kill us in the second test. And I don't know that there's any change of an attitude. They felt that actually if they could go and overwhelm us physically, that's how they would win. But our discipline was pretty incredible for the 2 tests. Our accuracy and technical prowess, Paul Wallace's pretty outstanding locking of the scrum, meant that we kept using their weight against them. Now, with all the best will in the world, there could have been disarray behind them, and I'm sure that there was. But their game plan was to grind us down and kick the points. They didn't pick a kicker. They picked players out of position, and they couldn't grind us down. So for me, I don't care what they think in terms of that. I think that they still were in an opportunity to do it. Would we have done something else if we had to, if they were kicking the kicks over? I think we would have played differently. The manner in which we played for the matches that weren't the tests, there was tries everywhere. We played a far more open style. But when we got to the tests, we dealt with what was in front of us. So, I'm not offended by what they think of us. It doesn't bother me what they thought of us. The only thing that we were there to try and do was to actually get a win.
Yeah. I didn't suspect you would be that bothered. I mean, it's not the most magnanimous thing of them to say, but I didn't suspect you'd be losing sleep either.
No, it isn't. But it is one of the things that I would still hold to South African rugby. So I was at the World Cup final in Tokyo, and the manner in which they won and played, I loved. They played with heavy hitting forwards, but they also played with magic in their back line. With 2 of the smallest guys playing in the World Cup in Faf de Klerk and Cheslin Colby. They were outstanding. It was a great joy of mixing power with elusiveness and skills. And so that was fantastic. But still, the core belief of South African rugby is that you have to intimidate them in the forwards, which they did do in the final. But the way to try and beat them, which is what's going to be interesting for the Lions going down there, is you have to meet that challenge. But I don't think you want to play exactly in the manner in which they're playing. So don't run at their chest, run at their arms, run at as much elusiveness as you can possibly have. But where they're strongest, you try and depower them. And look, it becomes one of the issues I have when we see a huge number of South Africans playing around the world, that everybody thinks that that's the way that you have to play, because it is a winning way of playing. But there are other ways of playing too. So it's funny, I go back to that tour and at the high point of my career, and I was young and it was still the high point of my career, which I wish I had more high points afterwards. But it was unbelievably difficult. It was incredibly hard. But they would have won it if they had a goal kicker.
Yeah, that's a big. I mean, they talk about that in the book at length, that they should have addressed that, and that's when they say disarray and picking players out of position was a massive bone of contention for a lot of them as well. And the goal kicker, look, their point probably stands. They didn't help themselves, but sure, that's life, I suppose.
But sure, we took the risk of picking a mercurial 10 in Gregor.
Yeah.
And Gregor is the most extraordinary rugby player. But there's times he might do things that nobody else was on his page with. And he didn't, as it turned out, on the Lions. But he wasn't picked as a kicker. We picked Neil Jenkins at 15. He was the furthest thing from a 15. And he really was. He wasn't a good 15.
Well, a few of them in the book as well, again, kind of ruminating on their own failings, wonder why didn't we bomb the ball down in Jenkins a lot more? They didn't seem to.
Well, they did one
Yeah.
in 2 tests, and he didn't get into the postcode to catch it.
Yeah, so you'd think we'll do that again.
Absolutely, if it works, do it again.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you what, if you were asking me to play a game in the morning, I would somehow fit Neil Jenkins into the team.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the interesting elements for me when I look back on the Lions tour was I thought he kicked every kick. He missed a few as well. I actually didn't think he missed a kick on tour. The sense of confidence and the emotion I have when I see Neil Jenkins go to kick a ball is that he puts it over. I just never thought of anything other than that. They couldn't put it over, but I never thought he missed. But he did. He missed a few.
Yeah. It's when clock's against me. There's a Peter Clossy story in it as well. I'm going to ask you about that another time because the clock is against me, and it's.
Okay.
I suspect we may come back to the '97 tour at some stage over the next 6 to 8 weeks. But on Jenkins, dry retching or even getting sick before games, it turns out in the book he says to Tom English, even as part of the Welsh coaching staff, not playing the games, the retching has continued, which is just unbelievable. It's not getting any easier for him.
I think that's just hilarious. I mean, look, I was one of the guys retching in the first test. I used to do that when I was much younger, and I got rid of it then. It never happened, I think, after that tour.
Right.
And actually, when one guy retches, there's always about 3 or 4 immediately follow in after him. But how could he do that and be so calm 10 minutes later?
Yeah.
He literally couldn't hold himself together in the changing room.
Right. Well, he's still doing it as a coach. I hadn't realised you were a retcher as well, so I'll come back to that at some stage.
Yeah. No fun in that.
Our rugby coverage with thanks to Vodafone, sponsors of the Irish rugby team of us, everyone in. Keith Wood, thanks very much. Pleasure.
Cheers, Joe.
Wednesday night rugby on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, official sponsors of the Irish rugby team. Team of us, everyone in.